Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating area, the biblical figure of Ephraim.
Right, and this compelling, maybe even surprising, potential connection to the Romani people.
Exactly. We've gathered, well, quite a range of sources, biblical texts from all over, Old and New Testaments.
Historical interpretations, too, and some, frankly, remarkable linguistic links.
Yeah. So, our mission here on this deep dive is to try and understand why Ephraim is so significant in prophecy.
And to really explore this, intriguing question about a possible link to the Romani.
So, where do we even begin? Maybe let's look at how Ephraim shows up right at the start in the Bible itself.
Okay, well, what jumps out almost immediately is Ephraim's status. He's elevated, despite being Joseph's second son.
Right, not the firstborn.
Exactly. And it's a theme you see again and again. Jeremiah 31.9 is very direct. Ephraim is my firstborn.
Huh. Despite the birth order.
Yes. And you see Jacob's powerful blessing in Genesis 49, and Moses kind of echoes this later in Deuteronomy 33.
So these foundational figures are all giving him this preferential treatment.
It really marks Ephraim as significant right from the get-go.
It really does make you wonder why, doesn't it? And then you look at the Romani language, and they're even more interesting. Our sources say Ephraim in Romani means something like to become Lord or to become exalted.
Wow. That's a powerful echo of that biblical theme, isn't it?
It really is. And then contrast that with Manasseh, his older brother. His name apparently translates to just man or people.
Right. There's a subtle difference there, a noticeable one.
Ah.
And to add another layer, you've got the adoption. Jacob adopting Joseph's sons, remember, Genesis 48.5.
Ah, yes.
And this wasn't just, a nice family gesture. It actually elevated Ephraim and Manasseh.
To the status of tribes within Israel.
Exactly. Gave them inheritance rights alongside Jacob's original sons.
So even though Levi was set apart for priestly duties, focusing on 12 inheritances often means including Joseph's line through both sons.
It's like doubling down on their importance in a way.
Yeah. It's a pivotal moment, and this becomes even more significant later on after Solomon's reign.
Right. This is where Ephraim's role gets bigger, wider.
The kingdom splits. And the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, become so strongly linked with Ephraim
That it was often just called Ephraim.
Yeah.
With Samaria, Omron in Hebrew as its capital.
So the name becomes more than just the tribe. It represents a whole chunk of the nation.
That's a crucial point to grasp, definitely. Then comes the Assyrian dispersion around, 722 BCE? And the northern kingdom, so Reuben, Simeon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Manasseh, and Ephraim. They're scattered.
All across the Assyrian Empire.
Right. And this is what leads to that whole concept of the 10 lost tribes.
Tribes, yeah.
Although, interestingly, the historian Josephus, writing centuries later, actually mentioned them existing beyond the Euphrates.
Oh, really? So suggesting they weren't entirely lost.
Maybe not entirely, just perhaps not integrated back into the main group of Israel that returned later.
And that was primarily Judah, right? And Benjamin, the southern kingdom.
Exactly. And of course, the Messiah's lineage comes through Judah.
So you've got this split, this massive scattering of the northern tribes, often called Ephraim, and then a return mainly for the south, which naturally leads to the big question, why keep focusing on Ephraim in prophecy?
If they're seemingly lost to history.
Yeah.
Yeah, why does the prophetic voice keep coming back to Ephraim?
Our sources seem to hint at, unfulfilled promises, prophecies tied specifically to Ephraim showing up again or being restored in the end times.
What could be the significance there of these, dormant promises?
Well, as we keep exploring this unique status of Ephraim as the firstborn, even though he wasn't born first.
And that deliberate transfer of blessings by Jacob, it all becomes even more significant. These aren't just one-offs.
No, it establishes a pattern, Ephraim being singled out.
And the name itself to become Lord or exalted, plus the tribe's later prominence, it all points to some kind of special destiny.
Absolutely. And our sources bring in this compelling idea of Ephraim being a Nazir among his brothers.
Nazir. So for people listening, that means someone specially dedicated, consecrated to God.
Right. Often through a vow, like not drinking alcohol, not cutting their hair, that sort of thing.
Separation and dedication.
Yeah. And this seems to link back to the blessings Joseph got in Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 33, where he's called separated or consecrated.
Interesting.
Even the imagery, of uncut vines in Leviticus tied to the sabbatical and Jubilee years, a time of rest, letting things grow.
It kind of echoes this idea of a distinct, maybe divinely protected path for Ephraim.
Possibly, yeah.
That's a fascinating connection. Then you had that prophecy in Isaiah 53, verse 2, about a shoot from dry ground.
Ah, yes, usually seen as messianic.
Right. But our sources offer another angle to think about. They contrast that image, something unexpected from desolation, with Jesus as the cultivated vine in John 15. So the shoot from dry ground could maybe symbolize something else arising from a seemingly lost or barren state.
Reflecting perhaps the dispersed, desolate condition of Ephraim's descendants.
It's a possibility worth considering. A different layer of interpretation.
That is really thought-provoking. And it fits, in a way, with Paul's analogy in Romans 11, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the olive tree representing Israel, Gentile Christians as wild branches grafted in.
Right. And Paul emphasizes God hasn't rejected his chosen people.
Exactly, just a temporary breaking off with the potential for all the branches, natural and grafted, to be brought back together.
Precisely. And if you look at the imagery of a ravaged vineyard, say in Joel chapter 1,
describing devastation, loss.
you can see that as symbolically representing the state of Ephraim's people. Scattered, identity may be obscured.
But Joel doesn't stop there, does he?
No, absolutely not. Chapter 2 offers this powerful message of future restoration, promises of return, renewal, abundance.
Which sort of brings us to the symbolism of the Jubilee year in Leviticus 25.
The release, every 50 years.
Yeah.
Release from debts, restoration of property.
A general sense of mercy, new beginnings. Could that be a symbolic pointer towards a future restoration for Ephraim, a kind of societal or spiritual release?
It's a compelling parallel, this idea of a cyclical return to wholeness. And then you've got the Feast of Pentecost, Shavuot.
With the offering of 2 leavened loaves.
Yeah. Our sources suggest this might foreshadow 2 witnesses, or perhaps
the 2 houses of Israel, Judah and Ephraim, brought back together.
That's one interpretation, yeah. And the fact the loaves are leavened, containing yeast, symbolizing maybe something not entirely pure in a ritual sense. That's an interesting detail.
It definitely adds complexity, and that Nazir concept pops up again.
Whereabouts?
Exodus 39, it describes the plate on the high priest's turban, the holy crown, signifying holiness, consecration.
Ah, okay. Linking to Zechariah 3 and the high priest Joshua getting a clean turban, purification, a renewed role.
Right.
What's really interesting here is the dual use of the term Nazir, or something very close.
What do I mean?
Well, in 2 Kings 11, the royal crown, the diadem, is also called Nezer. It's a closely related Hebrew word.
So you have this Nazir or Nezer idea connected to both priestly and kingly authority.
Exactly. Perhaps hinting at future figures, or maybe a future unity, embodying both roles.
And thinking about Zechariah, his vision in chapter 4, the 2 olive trees.
Beside the golden lampstand, constantly supplying oil.
Identified as the 2 anointed ones who stand before the Lord of the whole earth.
Could they represent Judah and Ephraim? Restored, providing spiritual light and leadership again.
It seems like a strong possibility within that prophetic context.
Then there's the famous prophecy of Shiloh, Genesis 49, point never day.
Until Shiloh come.
The King James says, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. But our sources stress interpreting Shiloh as meaning he to whom it belongs.
Suggesting a future figure with rightful authority.
Right, someone the nations will ultimately give allegiance to.
And that idea of rightful authority clicks with Ezekiel 21, doesn't it?
Where the turban and crown, symbols of authority, are removed.
Until he whose right it is shall come.
Yeah. Seems to point to a future person holding both royal and priestly authority.
A figure potentially linked back to those earlier promises, the significance tied to Ephraim.
Indeed. And Psalm 60, verse 7 in the King James Version offers another interesting angle.
Go on.
It says, Judah is my lawgiver. But then it mentions Ephraim and Manasseh in terms of strength and dominion.
Ah, Ephraim also is the strength of mine head.
Right. It suggests maybe a division of roles and strengths within a unified Israel, not just Judah having sole leadership. A different function, perhaps.
Yeah.
Our sources even toss in a linguistic possibility here.
Oh.
Suggesting the Hebrew for lawgiver might connect to a Romani phrase meaning something like, this is how it's done. Implying more of a teaching or guiding role.
Then ultimate ruling power. Wow, that's a fascinating linguistic rabbit hole.
Isn't it? And then you have verses like Daniel 4.17.
Remind me.
That the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whoever he wants, even the lowliest of men.
Could that be a hint? A subtle suggestion of an unexpected rise for Ephraim? A tribe that's been well, historically marginalized.
It certainly leaves the door open within God's sovereignty. And Psalm 80, that's such a poignant lament over the vine from Egypt.
Clearly Israel, but it specifically mentions Joseph and Ephraim in verse 2.
Before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh, stir up your might and come to save us. Yes.
And the psalm describes this vine as ravaged, pleading for restoration, highlighting the Son of Man God made strong.
Another potential pointer towards a key figure emerging from Joseph's line.
Seems possible. And Isaiah 63, verses 15-19, that prayer.
From a people feeling unknown, even by Abraham and Israel, yet calling God their father.
It really sounds like it could be describing the dispersed tribes, right? Including Ephraim, who've lost that clear connection to their history and land.
It definitely evokes that sense of scattered people longing for recognition, for restoration.
And going back to Jeremiah 31, that powerful, tender promise of Ephraim's return, Rachel being comforted.
The emphasis there on Ephraim's repentance, his heartfelt turning back in verse 18.
And God's deep, unwavering love for him in verse 20. It strongly suggests this lostness isn't the end of the story.
Absolutely not. Then Habakkuk 3.13-14, describing God coming powerfully.
For the salvation of his anointed and his people, defeating the head of the house of the wicked.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like an end times prophecy involving Israel's restoration.
And potentially with that significant role for Ephraim hinted at throughout.
Which brings us back full circle almost to Deuteronomy 33.1.
The image of Joseph with Ephraim inheriting that firstborn status.
Depicted as a firstborn bull whose horns push the nations.
Which connects powerfully to Psalm 2, doesn't it? The prophecy of a future ruler breaking nations with an iron rod.
Suggesting future leadership, influence for Ephraim's descendants.
And Isaiah 42. The servant figure bringing justice quietly, opening blind eyes, freeing prisoners.
Often seen as messianic, primarily.
Right, but our sources suggest maybe a dual fulfillment, or an added layer involving the restoration of a spiritually blind and deaf Israel, which could include Ephraim.
And Psalm 45, that beautiful song for the king.
Highlighting his splendor, God's blessing, righteous rule, being anointed.
It makes you wonder about the ultimate identity of this king. Does the scope maybe extend beyond the Davidic line to include those linked to Joseph and Ephraim's promises?
It's a question worth asking. Now, this is where that Romani connection gets particularly, well, compelling.
Okay.
Our sources point to the Hebrew word reem in Deuteronomy 33.17, often translated wild ox.
Right.
They note it sounds phonetically similar to Rom, the Romani self-designation.
Rim. Rom.
And furthermore, Ram in Hebrew also means something like exalted people.
That linguistic resonance. It's striking, you have to admit.
It really is. And this ties into that maybe misunderstood idea of the king of the Gypsies.
Which is often seen through a very romanticized or even stereotypical lens.
Exactly. But maybe it holds a deeper connection to these prophetic themes of leadership, of a distinct lineage among Ephraim's descendants, even if unrecognized.
Interesting.
And then Jeremiah 23 and 33, they talk about a righteous branch of David.
Will rule justly, bring safety, and be known by the name.
Javeh is our righteousness. Or, as our sources really emphasize the specific Hebrew, Yahweh Tsidkenu.
Tsidkenu. And the point is that this is maybe an unusual form, not the standard word for righteousness, tzedakah.
Exactly. The sources suggest it might be more than a description, maybe a specific name or title with deeper meaning.
Okay. Tsidkenu.
And this sounds remarkably similar to Atsingan.
A term historically linked with groups who later became known as Romani, and sometimes Samaritans too.
Yes, and while the Greek origin might mean heathen, our sources highlight the Romani understanding.
Meaning separated or consecrated, echoing that Nazir idea again.
Right back to it. Keeps coming up.
Wow. And adding to this web, the Romani self-designations, Samram.
I am Rom.
It also has that potential phonetic similarity to Shamron.
Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom, so closely tied to Ephraim.
These linguistic threads, woven through history across cultures, they're really thought-provoking.
Absolutely. Then there's that rather cryptic verse in Hosea 9.8.
Which one's that?
The watchman of Ephraim is with my God. The prophet is a snare on all his ways and enmity in his house.
It strongly suggests a prophetic role tied intimately to Ephraim.
But maybe a difficult one, a source of tension even within his own community.
Seems that way. So when you pull all these points together, Ephraim's firstborn status in God's eyes, the prophecies linked to him, hints of gathering nations.
And these compelling linguistic connections.
A theme of significant, maybe unfulfilled destiny just keeps emerging for this tribe.
And that historical link, the Romani connection to Egypt, the word gypsy from Egyptian.
It mirrors Hosea 9.3, the prophecy about Ephraim returning to Egypt because of disobedience.
It's another layer, isn't it? Historical linguistic parallels adding to the complexity.
Our sources also mention historical accounts where early Romani groups claimed Egyptian origins.
Right. And the linguistic links between all those terms, gypsy, gitan, gitano, zigeuner, tsigan, and the older Greek athenganos.
Exploring that potential shift in meaning from heathen to maybe consecrated or chosen.
And understanding the Romani self-perception as a distinct, often separated people, it adds more weight to this potential connection.
It really does. Which then leads into the idea of national angels, like in Daniel 10. Our sources ask, well, do the Romani, as this distinct dispersed group, have an angelic entity?
And they further suggest Christ as the angel of Jacob, or Israel, and by extension Ephraim.
He died for the whole world.
Well,
which could offer a theological lens for understanding the Romani's long history of suffering.
and their continuing hope for restoration. It's a powerful image, universal sacrifice, specific implications.
And looking at Psalm 2 again, nations raging against the Lord and his anointed.
God establishing his king on Zion.
And the promise that this king inherits the nations, he connects right back to that future role for the leader associated with Ephraim, the one with the rightful authority.
So as we sort of wrap up this deep dive, it's crucial to reflect on that long, often incredibly painful history of the Romani people. Our sources really ask, why would anyone oppose their potential exaltation or recognition in the end times?
Especially given that biblical theme of the last becoming first.
And the clear compassion God shows for Ephraim in Jeremiah 31, that deep fatherly love.
Absolutely. Ultimately, this whole exploration leaves us with, well, a sense of hopeful anticipation, doesn't it?
Ephraim's future restoration, yeah. And the fulfillment of God's promises, however that plays out.
It definitely raises profound questions about identity, prophecy, divine faithfulness across millennia. Gives you a lot to think about.